Welcome back to Under Baobab Skies. Tonight, we delve into the world of cocoa farming in Togo. Imagine yourself standing in the dense humidity of West Africa's forests. The air is thick, alive with the sound of insects and the rustle of palm fronds. The ground beneath your feet is rich and dark, fed by generations of rain and sun. But this beauty hides a punishing truth. For the men and women who bent their backs over cocoa trees, life was as bitter as the pods they harvested. In Togo, cocoa was not simply a crop. It was a chain that bound farmers to long hours of labor, to uncertain rains, to the mercy of buyers who weighed their beans and decided their fate. It was the story of hands blistered from machetes, of shoulders carrying sacks heavier than a man, and of spirits worn thin under a system that gave little in return. But within this harshness also lay resilience. Communities came together to survive. Songs were sung as pods were cracked. Small fires burned at night, where laughter momentarily softened the day's toil. And through the rhythm of planting and harvesting, farmers carried forward a connection to land that was older than colonial maps and deeper than market prices. Tonight, under the stars, we will walk slowly through this world. We will feel the heat that drained the body, the exhaustion that shaped the days, and the quiet pride of those who endured. We will trace how colonial powers wove their control through the cocoa trade, how ancient knowledge of the land was suppressed, and how elites rose upon the labor of many. This is not only the story of cocoa, it is the story of survival, of endurance, of the human spirit refusing to be broken. And so, let us settle beneath the baobab tree together, as the fire crackles and the stars emerge overhead. You are listening to Under Baobab Skies, and the story begins now. The sun, a molten coin tossed into the sky, turned the Togolese landscape into a shimmering sea of heat. Beads of sweat trickled down backs, mirroring the dewdrops clinging to cocoa leaves. Underneath the dense canopy, the air hung heavy, a humid shroud stifling any sound but the buzz of insects. Here, in the heart of West Africa, life unfolded to the rhythm of the sun and the relentless demands of the cocoa pods. From the time the first light touched the horizon, men and women had risen, their bodies moving in a choreography of labor. The machete, an extension of their arm, danced with deadly grace, hacking through the undergrowth and coaxing forth the precious pods. Each swing was a story, each cut a song of survival. They worked in silence, a solemn understanding binding them together in their shared toil. The forest, their constant companion, offered both sustenance and resistance. The tangled roots and thorny vines were a testament to the land's fierce independence, a mirror to the spirit that had refused to bend. Yet, even as the sun climbed higher, turning the sky into a molten sheet, there were moments of respite. Beneath the shade of a towering tree, a small fire crackled, sending wisps of smoke curling into the vast expanse above. Over the dancing flames, a pot hung suspended, its contents a promise of warmth and nourishment. Here, amidst the symphony of the forest, life flickered like a flame. Laughter mingled with the chatter of birds, and the midday meal became more than food. It was a communion, a celebration of shared endurance. Hands, rough and calloused, reached for the same pot, sharing a simple broth seasoned with the wild greens plucked from the forest floor. Each spoonful was a tribute to the earth, each bite a prayer for its bounty. But as the hours passed, the forest began to stir. The shadows, once shy whispers at the edge of the clearing, grew bolder, inching closer with the slow creep of twilight. The workers, attuned to the forest's language, felt the shift in the air. The sudden hush of the cicadas, the rustling of leaves that heralded the coming night. With the fading light, A sense of urgency quickened their movements. The race against darkness was as old as the cocoa trees themselves. They worked in hurried silence, their bodies taut with the day's labor, their minds focused on the task at hand. As the last rays of sunlight surrendered to the embrace of night, they gathered their tools, their silhouettes etched against the dying embers of the day. The forest, their silent witness, stood watch as they retreated into the gathering gloom, carrying with them the weight of a day's toil and the promise of another dawn. Beneath the sprawling branches of the baobab tree, the Togolese night unfolded. Around a crackling fire, the elders sat, their faces etched with the stories of a life lived in harmony with the rhythms of the land. Their eyes, deep pools of wisdom, reflected the dancing flames as they shared tales that had been woven into the fabric of their existence. The younger ones listened, their gaze fixed on the fire, their young minds absorbing the ancient narratives that had sustained their people for generations. You are now under baobab skies, and the story begins now. By the end of this part, you'll understand why the life of a Togolese cocoa farmer was one of endless strain, marked by blistering heat, heavy labor, and the crushing uncertainty of colonial economics. Now, if you've ever sipped a cup of hot chocolate or savored a spoonful of rich, creamy peanut butter, chances are you've tasted the legacy of Togolese cocoa. Togo, nestled in the heart of Africa, is a country where life revolves around the cocoa tree. But the journey from vibrant pods to your kitchen table is a story filled with sweat, struggle, and a touch of mystery. Picture this. An African farmer waking up before dawn in a tiny village surrounded by towering cocoa trees. Your day begins not with a rooster's crow, but with the insistent chirp of insects in the dense undergrowth. The sky is still dark, the world hushed, and you step out of your hut ready to face another day of back-breaking work. The faint glow of first light filtering through the canopy is your cue. You've got to hurry if you want to make the most of the day. Time is precious, and so is every drop of sunlight. Your machete is more than a tool. It's an extension of your arm. Its familiar heft balanced in your hand brings a sense of routine to this unending cycle of work. Today, like every day, you head to the cocoa field. Miles away, the air grows thick, heavy with humidity, the silence punctuated by the buzz of insects. The temperature rises steadily, and by the time you reach your rows of cocoa trees, beads of sweat are already forming on your forehead. You begin your task, and it's a mesmerizing one. Each cocoa pod, either a bright yellow or a deep red, is like a treasure waiting to be unearthed. The trees seem to tower above you, their branches laden with these precious pods. You move with a practiced grace, the machete singing as it cuts each pod free from its stem. It's an art form, honed over years of practice. The gentle rocking of the tree, the feel of the blade finding its angle. The sharp edge of the machete bites into the woody shell, and with a twist, the pod is free. You gather them in a basket, their color a vibrant splash against the dark earth. The forest floor is your working space, the rough bark of the trees, your seat. And as the hours pass, the baskets pile up, each one heavier than the last. But the real test comes next. The journey back to the homestead with your load. Some sacks weigh more than 50 kilograms, and you start to question why. Why subject yourself to this back-breaking labor? Why not abandon these heavy burdens and seek a different life? But the answer is woven into the fabric of your existence. This is not just work, it's survival. It's a tradition passed down through generations. It's your connection to the land. You leave the forest behind and step into your compound. Children's laughter mingles with the clucking of hens, and a welcoming smile of your wife greets you. For a moment, you can rest, catch your breath, and share a joke with your friends over a cup of coffee. Life isn't all about hard work. There's room for camaraderie, for joy, for the simple pleasures. Then it's time to start again. The pods must be processed. The soft outer shell is sliced away, revealing the precious beans within. These beans, often called the seeds of joy, hold the essence of your labor, your hopes, and your dreams. With deft hands, you scoop them out, placing them on banana leaves or in shallow pits. The air fills with a sweet, earthy aroma, a smell that speaks of transformation and anticipation. You know that these beans will travel far, maybe even across the ocean, to become the rich, decadent treats that grace tables in distant lands. But for now, they are just beans, and you have to coax them into their final form. This is the longest stage, the true test of your patience and commitment. Days turn into weeks, and you spend countless hours turning the beans, shuffling them, ensuring that they ferment evenly. It's a delicate dance. Too much water and they're ruined. Too much sun and they're scorched. Just right, and they transform, becoming darker, richer. The fermented beans, now smelling faintly sour, are laid out in the sun to dry. On woven mats or flat stones, they wait, exposed to the elements. The sky becomes your adversary, for every raindrop threatens to undo weeks of work. If the rains come, the beans must be gathered in, protected until the sun returns. This game of hide and seek with the weather tests your resolve. But the drying process is not just about battling the elements. It's also about waiting, about letting nature do its work. In the quiet moments, you might wonder why this life has been handed down through generations. Why not break free from this cycle of hard work and uncertainty? The answer is rooted in necessity, in the deep bond between the farmer and the land. This is their heritage, their tradition, and it's what sustains them. As the beans dry, the color deepens, the texture toughens, and you know that your work is nearly done. You have tamed nature's bounty, coaxed it into a form that will travel well beyond your village. Soon, these humble beans will become the luxurious chocolates that delight so many. But your life here, the life of the Togolese cocoa farmer, is far from that luxury. Your hands, now rough and calloused, bear witness to this. Your back, stooped from years of bending over cocoa pods, tells a silent story of toil. Your squinting eyes shield themselves from the relentless sun. Illness is a frequent visitor. Heat exhaustion, infections from cuts, aching joints, all whispering reminders of your arduous life. Yet you don't complain. You don't falter. You endure. For you, life is not about grand gestures or fancy comforts. It's about enduring the biting midges, the swarms of flies during fermentation, the punishing heat. It's about enduring so that the world can enjoy its chocolate. But there's a bitter truth lurking at the end of your hard work, a truth that stings more than any insect bite. When the beans are finally ready, they must be sold. The middlemen arrive, their scales are their gospel, their eyes the judge of your beans' quality. The price they offer is the difference between a good day and despair. And sometimes, despite all your effort, the price is so low that you wonder if it's worth it. You look at the baskets piled high with your life's work, then at the meager sum offered, and the sting of injustice hits home. You've toiled under the unforgiving sun, battled the elements, endured physical pain, all for this moment. And it feels like a punch in the gut. Yet you accept the money because you have no choice. This is your livelihood, your family's survival. So you gather your few possessions, say your goodbyes, and trek to the nearest market. The familiar sight of cocoa trees gives way to bustling crowds, noisy markets, and the chaotic charm of village life. The rhythmic hum of human activity is a stark contrast to the quiet solitude of the forest. Here, among the throng, You feel a sense of community, a shared understanding with those who have walked the same path, endured the same hardships. It's a silent bond forged in the fires of shared experience. Finally, you reach the market. Here, amidst a sea of faces, you're just one of many farmers. The scale tilts in favor of the buyer, and you know that your individual struggles are just a drop in a vast, complex ocean. The market is a place of negotiation, of subtle smiles and nods. The language is one you understand well, the language of hard work, resilience, and quiet dignity. In this setting, your role is clear, the weathered hands that bring forth the world's treasures. As the buyer weighs your beans, each grain telling a story of your life, you wait. The numbers on the scale dictate much more than just the price for your beans. It affects how you'll feed your family, pay for your children's education, buy essential goods. The price isn't just a number, it's a lifeline. When the price is good, there's a flicker of hope in your eyes, enough to sustain you until the next harvest. But when the price is low, you retreat into yourself, the weight of the world settling on your shoulders. The market is where dreams are priced, where hopes are bought and sold. You leave the market with your earnings, unsure if there'll be enough, knowing they won't change your life, but hoping they'll sustain it. You return to your village, to the comforting embrace of your family, to the silent wisdom of the cocoa trees. Life goes on. The cycle continues, and you, the Togolese cocoa farmer, remain at its heart. As the sun began its slow crawl toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the cocoa fields, the Togolese farmer knew he had crossed the hardest threshold of the day. Now, the relentless assault of the tropical air would ease, replaced by a welcome blanket of darkness. For him, this was not just nightfall, it was a truce in an endless battle. A battle against nature's fury and man's indifference. The heat had not just been a passing discomfort for him, it was a constant adversary. From sunrise until late afternoon, the tropical air pressed heavily against the body, offering little relief. The canopy above shielded the farmers from the harshest rays, yet the air beneath it grew stifling, thick with humidity. Sweat poured in rivulets, soaking clothes, blinding eyes, and making every movement a labor of endurance. Often, the farmers toiled barefoot, their feet hardened from years of contact with the soil and roots. Yet the earth beneath them was no soft refuge. It was alive with biting ants, mosquitoes, and other pests that thrived in the damp heat. Many carried scars from insect bites or infections that never fully healed. Each day was not only a struggle against the soil, but against the unseen creatures of the forest that sought to claim their blood and strength. But pests threatened more than the body. They menaced the harvest itself. The cocoa pod borer, a tiny insect, could ruin an entire crop by boring holes into the pods. Black pod disease spread like wildfire, covering fruit with rot. Farmers fought back with whatever means they could, cutting away infected pods, praying for better seasons. But often their efforts were in vain. A season's work could vanish in days, stolen not by thieves, but by the silent hand of disease and insects. For our farmer, this was more than a loss of income. It was a blow to his very dignity. His life's blood, sweat, and hope were not enough to secure a decent living. Instead, he was left at the mercy of forces beyond his control, a pawn in a game where the stakes were his livelihood and his dignity. But if the natural world was an enemy, there was another, more insidious foe, a spectre that haunted the farmer's waking hours and seeped into his dreams. This was the faceless buyer, the middleman who, come harvest time, would arrive at the village with his scales and his ledger. His arrival was always a somber affair, for he held in his hands the farmer's fate. The scales were final, their verdict absolute. If the beans were undervalued, a farmer had no recourse. He simply bowed his head, accepted the coins, and returned home to begin the cycle anew. It was a demoralizing routine, a constant reminder of their subordinate status. Generations of farmers had known this, submitting to the whims of buyers from colonial trading posts, often German or later French, during their respective rules over Togo. Now, in the twilight of his years, our farmer still felt the sting of this injustice. He remembered his father telling stories of those early days of how the colonial officials set the prices without any regard for the farmer's welfare, of how protests often fell on deaf ears, and of how dreams of a better life were often crushed under the weight of circumstance. It wasn't just the men who bore the brunt of this system. Women, too, felt its crushing weight. After days spent helping in the fields, they managed the household, stretching meager earnings to cover food, clothing, and school fees for children. At night, as the village fires burned low, conversations often returned to the same bitter question. Would next season bring more hardship or less? Hope flickered like an ember, yet it was never allowed to die, for hope was the only wealth many truly possessed. For our farmer's wife, the uncertainty of the market was a constant worry. She watched her husband grow older, his shoulders slumping further with each passing year. Not just because of age, but because of the burden he carried. The cocoa harvest was not just a gamble with nature, it was a gamble with the future. A gamble that often left the family poorer, hungrier, and more indebted. Yet life went on. The children had to be fed, the house repaired, and the next season's seedlings tended to. So she and her husband kept going, day after day, season after season. Even now, as he walked home from the fields with the setting sun at his back, he could feel the weight of his wife's unspoken worries pressing down on him. He knew that when he stepped into their hut, he wouldn't just be met with the aroma of wood smoke and fried plantains, but also with the quiet desperation that clung to his family like a second skin. For in this corner of the Togolese rainforest, life was more than a struggle for survival. It was a struggle for dignity, a struggle to hold on to hope in the face of despair, and a struggle to keep their ancient traditions alive in a world that seemed determined to erase them. As the night deepened, the chorus of the forest came alive. Insects hummed, tree frogs croaked, and the distant hoot of an owl echoed through the leaves. But these sounds were not just part of the landscape. They were a constant reminder of the forest's power, a power that could nourish but also destroy, a power that the farmers respected and feared in equal measure. Each rustle of leaves, each snapping twig sent a jolt of adrenaline through the farmers, their bodies attuned to the danger that lurked in the shadows. In this world, there was no safety net, no social security, no safety in numbers. Every single day was fraught with peril, whether it was a sudden illness, an animal attack, or a devastating flood. The Togolese farmers were on their own. Their lives were measured in the rhythms of the forest, the cycles of planting and harvesting, the changing seasons and the unpredictable weather. They lived on the edge, constantly bracing for the next challenge, the next twist of fate. They were, in essence, engaged in a high-stakes gamble with nature itself, and the stakes were nothing less than their survival. For our farmer, this was a reality he had come to accept. He had seen too many seasons come and go. He had weathered droughts that turned the red earth to dust, and floods that threatened to wash away their crops. He had seen the cocoa pods wither and fall prey to disease, and he had watched his neighbors succumb to despair, abandoning their farms and their homes in search of better lives in the cities. Yet he had stayed. He had stayed for his family, for his community, and for the land that had been in his family for generations. He was, after all, a child of the soil, and the soil had a way of anchoring one's roots deep within its embrace. As he walked on, the familiar path beneath his feet became a metaphor for his life. It was a path worn smooth by countless footsteps, a path that led not just to his home, but to the heart of his existence. The dirt road was not just a means to get from point A to point B. It was a passage through life's vicissitudes, a testament to his endurance and a symbol of the unbreakable bond between him, his land, and his heritage. He walked on, his silhouette a stark outline against the dying embers of the sunset, a solitary figure carrying the weight of generations past and present. His steps were not those of a defeated man, but of one who, despite the odds stacked against him, continued to walk his path, to live his life, and to tell his story. For in the grand tapestry of life, the story of the Togolese cocoa farmer is not just a tale of struggle, but a saga of resilience. A narrative of enduring hope in the face of despair and a testament to the indomitable spirit that refuses to be broken. So, as the darkness enveloped him, he walked on, his steps firm, his eyes fixed on the distant lights of his village. A beacon in the vast expanse of his struggles, a reminder that even in the darkest of nights, there is always the promise of dawn. And with that thought, we pause here, inviting you to reflect on the life of this extraordinary man and the myriad challenges he faces. The pressure was relentless, bearing down on them as steadily as the sun beat down from above. For the farmers of Togo, it wasn't just their backs that bent under the weight of work. Their lives, their health, their very futures were measured in the same way. As individual farmers bore the weight of the sun, the soil, and the market, the burden extended to the entire community. Villages formed tight networks of labor and support, yet the strain was never fully relieved. Each family was linked to another through labor exchanges, shared tools, and mutual reliance. When one household faltered under the pressure of disease, drought, or crop failure, neighbors stepped in, sending children to help, offering extra hands during critical moments. But the collective strain was palpable. Every adult knew that should their own strength fail, they, too, would become a burden, relying on the very people they had helped. There was no safety net, no room for weakness. Even the youngest understood this. Children joined the work as soon as they were able. Tiny hands learned to crack cocoa pods, scoop out the beans, and carry them to drying mats. They ran between rows of trees, balancing baskets heavier than their own bodies, learning from the elders how to judge pods, how to fight pests, how to survive. School attendance was often secondary to survival in the fields. Childhood was compressed into work and vigilance, and play existed only when fatigue allowed it. By the time they reached adulthood, most had known more hardship than laughter, more sweat than joy. And yet, even in this harsh reality, life went on. Communities adapted, they innovated, they survived. This is the story of their resilience. We begin our tale in the heart of Africa, where the sun blazes down with a fierce intensity. Here, amidst the lush greenery of the tropical forest, lived the Togolese people. Their days were long and hot, filled with the rhythmic hum of insects and the calls of exotic birds. Life was simple, traditional, and deeply rooted in the rhythms of nature. For generations, they had relied on the bounty of the land, growing crops and raising livestock to sustain themselves. But their world was about to change dramatically. Then came the cocoa. Introduced by European traders, it quickly became a cash crop, promising a way out of poverty. Villagers, lured by the promise of prosperity, began to plant vast tracts of land with cocoa seedlings. The trees grew tall, casting dappled shadows over the forest floor. Beneath them, precious beans awaited, holding the key to both fortune and hardship. As the cocoa trees flourished, so did the workload. Every pod that ripened added to the weight on the farmer's shoulders. Men, women, and even children were drawn into the cycle of planting, tending, and harvesting. It was a communal effort, a shared burden that bound them together. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, its rays beat down mercilessly on the villagers. They toiled under its scorching gaze, their backs bending under the weight of the pods, their hands, rough and calloused, expertly stripped away the outer skin, revealing the precious beans within. Meanwhile, the women played an equally vital role, though their labor remained largely unseen by the buyers and colonial officials. After the men brought home the pods, it was the women who processed the beans, fermenting and drying them. This labor-intensive process required patience, skill, and an intimate knowledge of the cocoa. It was a silent, cyclical work, often done in the shade of a tree while the beans rested. Yet, even as they worked, the women's hands remembered their other duties. They kept an eye on the cooking fire, ensuring that the midday meal would be ready. For the working men and children, they spun tales of bravery and resilience, weaving dreams of a better day when the burden would lift and the sun would shine a little less fiercely. But even as the women toiled and dreamed, the beans demanded constant attention. Every day, the farmers woke before the sun, their bodies aching from the day before's work, yet ready to face the new challenges that awaited. They checked the pods, testing their ripeness and carefully selecting those ready to be picked. Each pod they harvested was a gamble, a hope for a good yield. But the cocoa gods were capricious, and sometimes their hopes were dashed. Drought, pests, and diseases could strike with suddenness, devastating the crops and leaving families with empty baskets. But the Togolese people were not a people to be defeated. They had learned to live in harmony with the land. They understood the rhythm of the seasons, the language of the trees, and the needs of the beans. They fought back against the pests, coaxed the plants to health, and prayed for rain when the skies were dry. But even with their knowledge and tenacity, the challenges were immense. The work in the cocoa fields was not just hard, it was unrelenting. From the first light of dawn till the fading glow of dusk, the farmers were at their posts. The sun beat down on them, testing their endurance. The humidity clung to them, making each movement a struggle. And the relentless cycle of planting, tending, and harvesting left their bodies weary. And the children were not spared either. As soon as they were old enough to walk, they were in the fields. Tiny hands clutching small baskets, they scurried between the trees, gathering fallen pods or helping the adults with their tasks. Their innocence was traded for diligence, their games for work. Yet, in their eyes, one could still see the sparkle of childhood, a testament to the indomitable spirit of youth. This cocoa business had become their lives. It had taken root deep within their souls. They knew every twist and turn of the cocoa tree, every sign and symptom of the beans. They could tell you which pods would have the fattest beans, which branches needed the gentlest touch, which soil needed the most water. But despite their intimate knowledge of the cocoa, they remained at the mercy of the market. For the real power lay in the hands of the traders. The buyers arrived periodically, their presence like a storm that swept through the village, bringing with them the promise of money, of escape from the drudgery of the fields. Yet, when the buyers came, the farmers' fate was sealed. The beans they had nurtured, the hours they had spent under the blazing sun, all of it was reduced to a number on a scale. Their labor, their sweat, their hopes, their dreams, none of it seemed to matter. In the grand scheme of things, they were just numbers, cogs in a machine that ground them down day after day. But still, they persevered. Day after day, they returned to the fields, their backs to the sun, their eyes on the horizon, hoping for a day when the burden would ease, when the sun's rays would soften, when the market's scales would tilt in their favor. But that day seemed like a distant dream. And so they kept going. The Togolese farmers, their lives a symphony of sweat and toil, their hopes a melody carried on the wind, their dreams a rhythm that echoed in the rustling leaves of the cocoa trees. And as the sun set over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and red, the farmers walked home, their bodies aching, their spirits unbroken. They had faced the sun and the soil and the market, and they had survived. One might wonder why they didn't pack up and leave, why they didn't abandon these relentless fields that seemed to offer nothing but hardship and despair. But they couldn't. They wouldn't. For this land was more than just a source of hardship. It was part of their identity, their culture, their very existence. They were the Togolese people, and this was their home. They were born here, their ancestors had lived here, and they would die here, continuing the age-old dance with the cocoa. And then there were the children. The thought of their children going hungry spurred them on. The image of their children's hopeful faces fueled their determination. They had to keep going, not just for themselves, but for the next generation. For in their children's eyes, they saw the future, a future that they hoped would be better than their own. And so the cycle continued. The sun rose and set, the seasons changed, but the Togolese farmers kept going. They were a community bound by sweat, soil, and sun, their spirits unbroken by the weight of their toil. They were the people of Togo, and this was their story. Now let's take a moment to appreciate the resilience and strength of the Togolese people. Their stories teach us valuable lessons about endurance, community, and the unbreakable bonds of family. The story of cocoa in Togo cannot be told without the shadows of colonialism looming large. So, let's start our story back in the late 1800s. At the end of the 19th century, when European powers like Britain, France, Belgium, and Germany carved up the African continent into their own personal territories at the infamous Berlin Conference, little Togo found itself under the control of the Germans. It was a small colony compared to some of the others, but it became a testing ground for what would come to be known as scientific agriculture. German administrators were looking for crops they could sell on global markets for big profits, and they landed on cocoa. They brought in the beans from their neighbor, the Gold Coast, now known as Ghana, and started experimenting. By the early 1900s, they established experimental farms all over the place. And get this, they even built model villages for the farmers. But there was a catch. These farms were strictly controlled and supervised by German overseers. Farmers had to follow very particular ways of planting, spacing, and harvesting the trees. They couldn't do things the way they had been taught for generations. But wait, there's more. The Germans weren't just controlling the farms, they were also controlling what the farmers could grow. They pushed the farmers to abandon their traditional food crops, like yams, millet, and cassava, in favor of cocoa. Why? Because cocoa was the cash crop that would bring in the most profit for the German colonial government. In other words, the farmers were growing cocoa not to feed themselves or their families, but to sell to the highest bidder. Can you imagine how frustrating that must have been? Growing a crop year after year without being able to enjoy the fruits of your labor. All of this brings us to a pivotal question. What exactly is cocoa anyway? Well, cocoa is made from the seeds of the cocoa tree. These trees thrived in the warm, humid climate of Togo's southern regions. Farmers carefully selected the best seeds to plant and nurture them into healthy trees. Year after year, the cocoa trees spread across the landscape, their branches heavy with pods filled with those precious beans. But with this bounty came a whole new set of rules, taxes, and an economy that had little regard for the farmers themselves. Farmers had to follow very strict rules set by the colonial government. They couldn't just harvest the cocoa whenever they wanted. They had to wait until the beans were just right, and then only after getting permission from the colonial authorities. Talk about losing control over your own crops. And that's not all. They also had to pay taxes on the cocoa they sold. These taxes were often unfair and burdensome, and if the farmers couldn't pay them, they were severely punished. It was a lose-lose situation. They couldn't sell enough cocoa to become wealthy, but they also couldn't stop growing it because they needed the money. But what happens next will surprise you. When Germany lost its colonies after World War I, the League of Nations, which was an international organization created after the war to maintain world peace, stepped in, and guess what? They handed Togo over to France. So, under French rule, cocoa continued to expand, covering more and more land in the south of the country. But the system didn't change much. Farmers still had to work small plots of land and follow strict rules. They had to buy licenses to sell their cocoa and pay various levies and taxes. Plus, they could only sell their cocoa through colonial agents, who often took advantage of them. The French also set up cooperatives, which were groups of farmers who worked together to sell their cocoa. But even these were tightly controlled by the colonial government. The idea was to make sure that the cocoa flowed to European ports at a low cost, so that the Europeans could make more money. But for the farmers, it meant that they had no control over the price of their crops or how much money they made. In the 1920s and 1930s, people in Europe started craving chocolate more and more, which meant that Togolese farmers had to produce even more cocoa. But even though they worked hard and produced a lot, they still didn't make much profit. Some families who once grew their own food on their farms now had to rely on selling their cocoa to buy the food they needed. When the global economy took a downturn during the Great Depression, the price of cocoa dropped even further, making it hard for farmers to make ends meet. It was a really tough time. And to top it off, cocoa trees take about 5 years to start producing, which meant that farmers couldn't just switch to something else right away. They were stuck growing a crop they didn't control. Now let's fast forward to the mid-20th century. By this time, cocoa had become both a lifeline and a chain for the Togolese people. On one hand, it provided a way for the colony to earn money and survive. On the other hand, it kept many farmers stuck in cycles of poverty. As independence movements swept across Africa, Togolese leaders realized that to truly be independent, they needed to break free from the grip of colonial powers, including the control they had over cocoa. The legacy of cocoa in colonial Togo was a complicated one. It played a significant role in shaping the country's economy and its people's lives. To truly understand this story, we need to look beyond just the beans and the markets. We need to understand how colonialism works. Colonialism is a system where a powerful country controls and exploits another country for its own benefit. During the colonial era, European powers like Britain, France, and Germany colonized many parts of Africa, including Togo. They took control of the land, resources, and people in these regions and exploited them for their own economic gain. In the case of Togo, the Germans, and later the French, controlled every aspect of the cocoa industry. They decided how much cocoa should be grown, how it should be processed and sold, and most importantly, how much money it would fetch in the market. This control allowed them to extract wealth from Togo and its people without giving anything back. They used the profits from cocoa to build their own industries and infrastructure, rather than investing in Togo itself. And that's not all. Colonial powers also imposed harsh laws and regulations on the farmers. They had to follow strict rules and pay taxes on their crops. If they couldn't meet the quotas or pay the taxes, they faced severe punishments like fines, imprisonment, or even having their land taken away. This system of control and exploitation continued for decades, leaving a lasting impact on Togo and its people. Even after gaining independence, the legacy of colonialism and its effects on the cocoa industry still linger today. The German agents in Togo had no idea what they were missing. They walked among the cocoa trees looking for signs of trouble. But the trouble was right there in front of them, and they were ignoring it. The trouble was in the faces of the farmers, faces weathered by the sun and etched with worry, faces that hinted at a strength the agents couldn't see. You see, in the eyes of the colonial powers, the Togolese farmers were not people with agency, not individuals with hopes and dreams and memories. No, they were numbers. They were entries on ledgers that showed how much profit the empire was making. Each farmer was a cog in the imperial machine, a nameless face that ensured those profits kept rolling in. But this story is not one of pure submission. It's a story of quiet rebellion, of small acts of defiance that were as Togolese as the soil they walked on. Let me go back to the beginning. When the Germans came to Togo, they brought with them an obsession, efficiency. They wanted order, they wanted productivity, and most of all, they wanted results. So they set out to transform the landscape, to replace the wild diversity of African crops with neat rows of cocoa trees. And for a while, it seemed like it was working. By the end of the 19th century, German agents were reporting impressive yields, numbers that climbed higher than the tall trees that shaded the farms. And as the profits grew, so did German confidence. They sent more agents, more experts, more people to oversee the work, to make sure every bean met their standards. And they created a system to catch any who tried to cheat it. A system that penalized farmers for late deliveries or low-quality beans. A system that sounded fair but was designed to punish. You see, the Germans, like many empires before and after them, thought they had it all figured out. They had the rules, they had the inspectors, they had the penalties. What they didn't have was any understanding of the land, of the weather, of the pests, or, most importantly, of the people. For example, they underestimated the Togolese farmer. They thought he was a simpleton who knew nothing, who would just listen to instructions and follow them blindly. But the farmer was not so simple. He understood the land. He knew when the rains would come and when the sun would linger too long. He knew how to coax the cocoa trees and how to protect his crops. And most importantly, he knew how to survive. So, while the Germans looked on proudly at their neatly organized farms, they were missing something. They were missing the silent acts of resistance, the ways in which the farmers were holding on to their way of life, the ways in which they were protecting themselves. One way was to hold on to tradition. Officially, the Germans wanted only cocoa. They demanded that the farmers uproot their yam plots and replace them with more cocoa trees. But the farmers didn't. They kept their yams, not in big fields, but in small patches hidden between the cocoa rows. Yams were their food, their sustenance. They weren't going to let the Germans take that away without a fight. It might seem like a small thing, a small patch of yams in the middle of a cocoa field, but it wasn't. It was a statement. It was a refusal to be completely replaced. It was a way of saying, we will not be erased. And this brings us to this image. Take a moment to look at it. Imagine yourself in the shoes of the German agent. You walk among the cocoa trees, checking each one, making sure it's healthy, counting the pods, calculating the yield, and then you see this. A Togolese farmer standing between the cocoa trees, not alone, but surrounded by small yam plants. Plants that are not part of the German plan. Plants that remind him of home, of tradition, of survival. The German agent may think he sees a farmer, just a farmer, but that farmer is hiding more than just yam seeds. He's hiding strength, a strength that comes from tradition, from community, from a deep understanding of the land. But there was more to resistance than holding on to tradition. There was also the question of timing. You see, the Germans wanted everything on their schedule. They wanted the beans harvested at a certain time, dried in a certain way, delivered at a certain place. They didn't care about the rains or the pests or the quality of the beans. They just wanted quantity. They wanted profit. But the Togolese farmer knew better. He knew that the land didn't work on German time. It worked on its own time. So he played along. He pretended to follow the German timetable, but he also kept his own calendar. Sometimes he delayed harvesting his cocoa, claiming bad weather or pests, so he could sell some beans on local markets before the German buyers arrived. He knew those markets would pay less than the Germans, but that was okay. He was playing a long game. For the farmer, it wasn't just about surviving. It was also about dignity. It was about not being a pawn in the German profit game. To him, it was wisdom. To the Germans, it was disobedience. But here's the thing, both were right. The Germans valued obedience, but they also valued results. And by delaying deliveries, the Togolese farmers were getting results. They were surviving, thriving even in spite of the Germans. Think about the scene again. But this time, imagine yourself as the Togolese farmer. You stand in your grove, the German overseer's words echoing in your ears. The deadline he gave you burned into your mind. But you look around you. You see the ripening pods, the promise of harvest. And you hear the cicadas singing in the heat. They don't care about the overseer's calendar. They live by the sun and the earth. And you know what you do, too. There were other forms of resistance, too, quieter ones, harder to spot. But if you knew where to look, you would have seen it. For instance, you would have seen it in the eyes of the old folks, the ones who remembered a time before the Germans, the ones who told stories of a different way of life. They spoke of a time when the land was theirs, when the cocoa trees hadn't choked out the yams, when the decisions about planting and harvesting were theirs, not the German agents. Their stories were resistance, a way of keeping their culture alive, a way of passing on their history to the next generation. And if you had listened to those stories, you would have heard more than just nostalgia. You would have heard resilience, strength, and a quiet determination to hold on to identity in the face of erasure. You would have also seen resistance in the way people organized, the way they gathered in the evenings, under palm trees or within earthen courtyards to talk, to plan, to dream. In those gatherings, under the cloak of night, they exchanged news about prices, shared tricks to survive the German quotas, and sometimes even planned collective refusals. Now, these meetings didn't always lead to action. Sometimes the threat of punishment was too great, the risk of losing their farms too high, but the fact that they met, that they talked, that they dreamed together, that was resistance. It was a way of building community, of creating solidarity, of reminding each other that they were not alone. Imagine the scene. It's nighttime in a Togolese village. Palm trees sway gently in the evening breeze. Lanterns cast a soft glow on the faces of the villagers. Their voices hushed but determined as they discuss the best way to resist the German agents. Elders share stories of past struggles, of times when they've stood up to authority and won. Young men argue about strategies, about when and how to take action. Everyone has a voice. Everyone matters. This is not just a meeting. It's a community taking charge of its own destiny. Now, of course, these gatherings didn't change the course of history overnight. They didn't suddenly make the Germans pack up and leave, but they did plant seeds. Seeds of unity, seeds of resistance, seeds that would grow into something stronger, something that would outlast the Germans. And that's the thing about quiet resistance. It might not always be visible, but it's there. It's in the cracks of the system, in the whispers of the people, in the land itself. It's a constant pushback, a constant reminder that true power comes not from guns or from profits, but from the people, from their unity, their culture, their connection to the land. As the Germans left and the French came, as the world changed and the times grew darker, those seeds took root and grew. And when the day came for full independence, when the Togolese looked back at their history, they saw a long struggle, not just against a foreign power, but against an idea that people were nothing more than numbers on a ledger, that they could be bought and sold like commodities. They saw a struggle that had been fought not just with guns, but with dignity, with culture, with the quiet courage of everyday people. And they knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they had the strength to keep going, the strength to keep fighting for their land, for their future, for their freedom. When Togo stepped into independence in 1960, the cocoa fields remained, but the air was different. The flags changed, the speeches grew hopeful, yet the farmer still bent beneath the same sun, his hands still stained with soil and sweat. What shifted was less the work itself, and more the layers of power above it. French merchants did not vanish overnight. Their trading houses still loomed in the ports, their ships still docked, in their contracts still favored European buyers. Yet Togolese leaders now stood between farmer and foreigner, promising to lift their people with the very crop that had long weighed them down. Cocoa, once a symbol of colonial extraction, was recast as a path to national prosperity. Our story today begins in the bustling port city of where the mighty ships from Europe docked, carrying with them the hopes and dreams of an entire nation. The air buzzed with anticipation as the Togolese dockworkers, strong and proud, unloaded sacks of cocoa beans, each one a potential step towards a brighter future. They hoisted the heavy sacks onto the docks, their muscles straining under the weight of their labor. With each movement, they were not just moving cocoa beans, they were carrying the hopes of generations past and present. In the heart of the action stood a lone French merchant, his eyes sharp and calculating, a relic of the colonial era. He watched the unloading with a keen eye, assessing the quality of the beans, negotiating prices, and ensuring the wheels of trade kept turning smoothly. His presence, a reminder of the colonial past, sparked a mix of emotions among the Togolese workers. There was resentment simmering beneath the surface, a legacy of exploitation under the old regime. Yet there was also a grudging respect for the efficiency and organization the French brought to the trade. As the sun beat down on Lomé, the scene unfolded like a silent drama. On one side were the Togolese dockworkers, their faces etched with the hardships of their labor, their spirits a mix of weariness and hope. On the other side stood the French merchant, a symbol of the colonial past, his face betraying none of the thoughts racing behind his eyes. Between them was the cocoa, a precious commodity that had been the lifeblood of Togo's economy, a product of the land and the sweat of countless farmers. The atmosphere crackled with the weight of history, the struggle between tradition and modernity, between exploitation and empowerment. It was a battle that would play out not just at the docks, but in the boardrooms of Paris, in the bustling markets of London, and on the farms nestled in the hills of Togo. But wait, hold on a second, as the camera pans away from the docks of Lomé, revealing the vast expanse of cocoa fields stretching as far as the eye can see, a single question arises. What exactly is cocoa, and why does it hold such immense importance? Imagine strolling through your local grocery store, past aisles of colorful candies and cereals until you arrive at the chocolate section. There you are greeted by a myriad of choices. From rich dark chocolate to creamy milk chocolate, each bar promising a delightful taste of indulgence. But have you ever wondered about the journey that brought those chocolate bars to your fingertips? That magical transformation from bean to chocolate all starts with one key ingredient: cocoa. Picture vast plantations in West Africa, the source of approximately 70% of the world's cocoa, where rows upon rows of cocoa trees stand tall. These trees bear pods, which, when split open, reveal the precious beans nestled within. Beneath the rough exterior, these beans hold the essence of chocolate, waiting to be discovered. Now let us travel back in time to the early 1800s, when the demand for sugar was on the rise, and European powers sought new sources to satisfy their cravings. Their sights turned to West Africa, where the fertile soil and tropical climate provided the perfect conditions for growing cocoa. European traders, driven by the allure of profit, embarked on expeditions to acquire cocoa beans and transport them back to Europe. With dreams of striking it rich, they introduced the cocoa bean to the world, sparking a love affair that continues to this day. Today, cocoa stands as the backbone of many African economies, offering both challenges and opportunities. On one hand, it provides a valuable source of income and employment to countless farmers and workers. On the other hand, the industry has faced criticism for historical ties to slavery and exploitation, as well as concerns about child labor and unsustainable farming practices. As consumers, we have the power to influence positive change. By supporting fair trade initiatives, we can ensure that cocoa farmers receive a fair price for their crops, promoting sustainable farming practices and better working conditions. Educating ourselves about the origins of our chocolate and making conscious purchasing decisions can make a real difference. Each bite of chocolate is a testament to the hard work and dedication of cocoa farmers. It is a reminder that behind every delicious treat lies a complex global supply chain and the stories of countless individuals who play a part in bringing us this beloved ingredient. As the years rolled by, the Togolese government, eager to assert its newly found independence, took significant steps to reshape the cocoa industry. Among these measures was the establishment of marketing boards, entities designed to oversee the buying and selling of cocoa beans on behalf of the farmers. These boards, backed by the full force of the state, aimed to create a stable and reliable market for the farmers, safeguarding them against the vagaries of the global cocoa trade. The government set fixed prices for the cocoa beans, providing farmers with a sense of security and ensuring a certain minimum return on their labor. However, this system, while well-intentioned, sowed seeds of suspicion and mistrust among the farmers. Whispers began to circulate, casting shadows of doubt on the intentions of the very leaders who had promised to champion their cause. Farmers started to suspect that the marketing boards, instead of being a beacon of stability, were becoming a new avenue for exploitation. The state, much like the colonizer before it, was taking the lion's share, leaving the farmers with mere scraps. Rumors spread like wildfire through the dense cocoa groves, carried on the wind, rustling through the leaves and echoing in the hearts of the weary farmers. Each rumor added another layer of complexity, painting a grim picture of deceit and betrayal. One story told of shadowy figures manipulating the market, of corrupt officials pocketing the profits, and of empty promises that left the farmers high and dry. The trust that had been so carefully built during the struggle for independence was crumbling, replaced by a growing sense of disillusionment and despair. Amidst this climate of suspicion, the farmers began to tighten their grip on their crops. holding on to their produce and refusing to sell at the prices dictated by the marketing boards. They huddled together in small groups, sharing stories and fears, their voices echoing the age-old cry for fair treatment, for recognition, and for a better future. The silence of the cocoa groves was broken by murmurs of discontent, each murmur carrying the weight of generations past and the hopes of generations yet to come. This discontent was not merely a whisper in the wind. It was a storm brewing on the horizon, threatening to shake the foundations of Togo's cocoa industry and its people's faith in their leaders. Yet, amidst this challenging period, a new generation of Togolese traders was quietly rising. Determined to carve out their place in the cocoa economy, they possessed an entrepreneurial spirit and a deep understanding of their local markets, qualities that would prove invaluable in the years to come. As the Togolese economy began to stabilize, these ambitious traders seized the opportunity. They established small export firms, acting as intermediaries between the farmers and the larger international market. With each successful transaction, their reputation grew, cementing their positions as key players in the cocoa trade. These men and women were not just traders. They were visionaries. They envisioned a future where Togolese entrepreneurs stood shoulder to shoulder with their European counterparts, where African faces graced the markets that had long been dominated by outsiders. Their emergence marked a quiet revolution in the cocoa industry, a shift from dependence to empowerment, from exploitation to opportunity. They understood the intricacies of the global cocoa market and leveraged their knowledge to secure the best prices for their products. Moreover, they were deeply rooted in their local communities, earning the trust of the farmers and providing them with a sense of security and reliability. As the Togolese cocoa industry began to flourish, these traders played a pivotal role in shaping its trajectory. They became the ambassadors of Togo's cocoa, showcasing its quality and sustainability to the world. Through their efforts, Togolese cocoa gained a reputation for its exceptional flavor and the fairness of its production, attracting conscious consumers who valued both quality and ethical sourcing. Their success stories became beacons of hope, inspiring countless young Togolese to pursue their own entrepreneurial dreams. They demonstrated that with hard work, determination, and a deep understanding of the market, they too could break free from the shackles of colonialism and carve out their own destinies. However, despite the progress made, the Togolese cocoa farmers continued to face challenges. Global price fluctuations, extreme weather conditions, and the threat of diseases loomed over their crops, casting a shadow of uncertainty over their livelihoods. Despite the challenges, the Togolese people remained resilient. They knew that their strength lay in their unity, their resourcefulness, and their unwavering determination to shape a better future for themselves and their children. The spirit of independence that had fueled their journey to freedom continued to guide them, reminding them that they had the power to overcome any obstacle. The story of Togo's cocoa is a testament to the human spirit, a tale of resilience, adaptation, and the pursuit of a better life. From the depths of colonial exploitation to the heights of national independence, the farmers and traders of Togo have navigated a path filled with challenges and triumphs. They have witnessed the ebb and flow of fortunes, the changing tides of the global market, and the enduring power of community and hard work. As the sun sets over the Togolese cocoa fields, it paints a picture of resilience and hope. The farmers, with their hands calloused by years of labor, stand as symbols of strength and determination. Their connection to the land runs deep, and their knowledge passed down through generations guides them in nurturing the cocoa trees and safeguarding the delicate balance of nature. The journey from seed to chocolate is a testament to their skill and expertise. ensuring that each bean carries within it the essence of their hard work and dedication. Despite the challenges that lie ahead, the Togolese people remain steadfast in their pursuit of a brighter future. They have come too far to turn back now. With each passing day, they strive to build a nation where independence is not just a word, but a way of life where the fruits of their labor are shared by all, and where the rich tapestry of their culture continues to thrive, inspiring generations to come. And with that thought, our journey through this chapter comes to an end. Long before colonial ships cast their anchors on the shores of Togo, the soil already knew the hands of its people. The earth was not seen as something to conquer, but something to listen to. A living body with moods, rhythms, and secrets. Farmers were not just laborers, they were interpreters of the land. Guardians of wisdom passed down in whispers at the hearth and in the quiet lessons of the fields. Farmers were attuned to the land's moods, reading subtle signs like the tilt of a termite mound or the pattern of grasses after the rains. They understood that each river had its own character, some gentle and bountiful, others quick to flood and then retreat, leaving the fields parched. They knew which hills held water like a sponge, and which shed their moisture quickly. And when the first butterflies of the season appeared, they knew that the rains were not far behind. In the Awe language, the word for farmer, baka, also means listener. This was no idle title. Farmers were those who listened to the earth's whispers, interpreted its dreams. Their understanding was not written in books, but in memories and muscles, in the calluses of their palms and the tilt of their hips as they moved through the fields. Among the Awea and other peoples of the region, the planting of cocoa trees was not only about profit. It was a ceremony, a conversation between the farmer and the earth. Each mound of earth was prepared with care, sometimes blessed before receiving the precious seeds. The planting hole was more than just a gap in the ground. It was a prayer whispered directly to the heart of the earth. The farmers did not sow the seeds blindly. They held ceremonies, consulted with elders, and even sang songs to coax the cocoa to life. Once planted, the farmers continued to converse with the trees. They tied raffia around young shoots to guide their growth. They sang to them during dry spells, asking for endurance. And when the first pods appeared, they celebrated not just the promise of harvest, but the endurance of life itself. When the cocoa tree flowered, it was a moment of both beauty and revelation. The flowers, delicate and fleeting, burst forth in abundance, filling the forest clearings with their heady fragrance. For the farmers, this was more than just a spectacle. It was a sign of the tree's health, a confirmation that all their rituals and efforts were resonating with the tree's ancient wisdom. These intimate interactions were not limited to the clearing or the individual tree. The farmers saw themselves as part of a larger community, linked not just to the trees, but to the spirits that inhabited the forest. Every bend of the river, every play of light and shadow, every rustle of leaves held a story, a lesson, a warning. The farmers carried these stories in their hearts, ensuring that the wisdom of the forest flowed through their veins. And when the harvest moon rose, heavy with promise, the farmers gathered. They did not just bring in the cocoa pods. They brought in stories, each pod a new tale to tell, each harvest a new chapter to write in the book of the land. In the tapestry of their lives, cocoa was more than just a crop. It was a confidant, a witness, a silent partner in their journey through time. Generations of farmers had conversed with these trees, their whispers echoing in the rustling leaves. The earth had listened, had responded in kind, sharing her bounty and her secrets. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields, the old man sat beneath his favorite tree, a cocoa tree that had borne witness to his life. Its roots ran deep in the soil, its branches reaching up as if in prayer to the heavens. He closed his eyes, the scent of wet earth and ripening cocoa enveloping him like a familiar blanket. He thought of his father, his grandfather, the long line of farmers who had tended these lands, coaxing life from the earth and weaving stories into the fabric of the soil. The earth had listened, had responded in kind, sharing her bounty and her secrets. But now the rhythm was changing. Distant voices, the rumble of engines, the rustle of papers in the hands of men who came from far-off lands with their coats and their books. They spoke of progress, of efficiency, of maximizing yields. They came bearing gifts, shiny machines, and strange potions that promised to boost the harvest. Yet the old man felt a disquiet within him, a tremor in the harmony that had sustained his people for generations. He remembered the days when the land spoke to him, when the whisper of the wind through the leaves was a lullaby, when the murmur of the river was a story, when the earth beneath his feet was a teacher. The young man beside him, his son, spoke with excitement, his eyes shining with the fervor of youth. He told his father about the new techniques he had learned, the fertilizers and pesticides that could increase their yields, the hybrid seeds that promised faster growth and heavier harvests. He dreamed of prosperity, of a life beyond the confines of their small village. The old man listened, his heart heavy with the weight of ages. He saw the thirst for progress in his son's eyes, the same thirst that had driven his own father before him. He understood the allure of the new, the promise of a better life. But he also felt the loss, the fading of an old way of life, the weakening of an ancient bond. He looked out at the vast expanse of their farm, at the rows of cocoa trees that had stood sentinel over their land for decades. He saw not just trees, but a legacy, a testament to his ancestors' wisdom, their patience, their deep understanding of the land. With gentle hands, the old man reached out, touching the rough bark of the tree. He closed his eyes, and in that moment, he was home. He was home in the rhythm of the rain, in the sigh of the wind through the leaves, in the heartbeat of the earth beneath his feet. He was home in the wisdom of his ancestors, in the strength of his heritage, in the love of his land. For the old man, going home was more than just a physical return. It was a homecoming of the soul, a homecoming to the wisdom of the earth and the echoes of his heritage. When the sun dipped below the horizon, the fire crackled softly, and we imagined the soil itself as a teacher, speaking in signs that only the patient could hear. The old man and his son sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts, yet connected by the bonds of family, tradition, and the enduring spirit of their land. In the flickering firelight, the old man saw not just his son, but generations of farmers stretching back into the mists of time, each one listening to the whispers of the earth, each one contributing to the story of their land. He saw himself as a link in this unbroken chain, a custodian of wisdom, a keeper of stories. And as the night deepened and the stars twinkled above them, the old man knew that the wisdom of the earth would continue to echo through the ages, guiding those who listened with hearts open and minds ready to learn. Colonial officers often dismissed this wisdom, calling it superstition. Yet modern agronomists, studying the same lands, have found that many of these practices were grounded in sharp ecological observation. Rotating fields, mixing crops, planting shade trees. These were not quaint customs, but strategies honed over centuries to protect fertility and balance. Where Europeans saw wildness, locals saw design. Where colonizers imposed chemicals and monoculture, indigenous farmers had already built resilience through diversity. But perhaps the greatest wisdom was patience. Cocoa trees, unlike quick crops, required years before bearing fruit. To plant them was to believe in the future, to trust that one's children or grandchildren would harvest what had been sown. In this way, cocoa farming was an act of faith, a covenant with time itself. It linked generations, reminding each that their hands were part of a chain far older and far longer than their own lives. And as the Togolese farmer tends his cocoa grove, he doesn't just manage a crop. He carries on a conversation, a dialogue that stretches back to the dawn of his people's history, a dialogue between man and nature, between the present and the ancestors, between hope and the patient unfolding of time. As I'm sure you know if you've been watching this series, the world is full of fascinating relationships between people and the plants they grow. And one of the things that makes those relationships so intriguing is how much they vary even within a single country. Today, we're in Togo, back in the village, to explore what happens when a tree crosses the line between commerce and culture, between the market and the sacred, when it goes from being just a plant to becoming something more, something that nourishes the soul as well as the stomach. You know, in our globalized world, it's as easy to forget that many of the foods we take for granted have histories that are rich, complex, and deeply rooted in local cultures. Take cocoa, for instance. We all love our chocolate, hot cocoa on a cold day. But have you ever stopped to think about where those precious beans come from? What kind of lives they led before they became the delicious treat we all know and love? Well, in many Togolese villages, cocoa was more than a crop. It stood at the crossroads of survival and spirit, feeding both body and belief. Though introduced from distant lands, the tree was woven into the sacred rhythms of local life, treated with the same reverence once given to ancestral crops like yam or millet. Over time, cocoa ceased to be only a plant for trade. It became a quiet participant in rituals, offerings, and symbols of continuity. In the heart of Togo, nestled amidst rolling hills and vibrant markets, we meet Joseph, an elder in his village. As the sun paints the sky in hues of orange and purple, he shares stories that are as rich and textured as the cocoa pods hidden within the thick canopies nearby. Joseph tells us about a time when every tree was seen as more than just wood and leaves. Every tree housed a spirit, a silent presence demanding respect. He recalls how his father, a man weathered by years spent under the African sun, would always pour libations of palm wine at the base of the trees before the first harvest of the season. This wasn't a religious ceremony in the formal sense, but it was an acknowledgement, a way of saying thank you and asking for continued blessings. It was about understanding that the abundance the land provided did not come by human strength alone, but through the will of higher forces. He remembers his father's words, "The cocoa tree, it does not belong only to our hands. It belongs to the spirits of the land. We work it, yes, but we must always remember it is the spirits that give it life." And it wasn't just the trees that held significance. The beans themselves found subtle places in daily rituals. A few carefully picked beans might be placed on family shrines as offerings, not because of their monetary value, which was often modest, but because they represented nourishment, growth, and the sweat of honest work. Then there were the marriages. When two families came together under the shade of ancient trees to unite their children, the sharing of cocoa pods became a symbol of fertility, patience, and the promise of sweet fruit after long seasons of labor. Each pod, each careful movement of the hand during the sharing, had a story to tell, a narrative that wove the couple's future into the rich tapestry of tradition. For Joseph, these customs were more than mere rituals. They were a way of life, a communion with the earth that sustained them and the spirits that watched over them. his wrinkled hands etched with the stories of 1,000 harvests. Gently caressed the rough bark of an old cocoa tree as he continued his tale. "These trees, they've seen generations come and go," he said, his voice a low rumble like the distant thunder of coming rain. "They've listened to our prayers and shared in our joys. They are more than just plants. They are our partners in survival, participants in our ceremonies, silent witnesses to our lives." The air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves as Joseph led us deeper into the grove. Each step was a journey back in time, each rustle of leaves a whisper from the past. The sun filtered through the dense canopy overhead, painting the forest floor in a mosaic of light and shadow. There, nestled between the sturdy trunks and laden branches, lay the final resting place of many a cherished pet. Here, a dog, a loyal companion, had found eternal rest beneath a sprawling cocoa tree. There, a cat, sleek and graceful, had been laid to rest near a tree that mirrored its elegant form. Each burial was a small ceremony, a quiet goodbye filled with sorrow and fond memories. The cocoa tree, with its enduring presence, became a natural monument, a silent guardian of memories that transcended the boundaries of species. It stood as a symbol of continuity, connecting the living to the dead through a shared experience of loss and remembrance. But it wasn't just in the hush of solemn rituals that the cocoa tree played its part. It was also in the vibrant celebrations that marked the rhythm of village life. Harvest time was not just toil, it was a festival of its own. From the earliest hints of dawn, when the sky blushed with the promise of a new day, the air thrummed with energy. The regular thud of machetes cutting open pods echoed through the groves, blending with the chatter of villagers and the rustle of leaves in the gentle morning breeze. Families worked side by side, their movements a practiced dance over the years. Laughter mingled with the sounds of labor as jokes cracked like the snapping of a dried cocoa pod. Children, their eyes bright with excitement, ran between the trees, their laughter echoing the joy that swelled in their hearts. When the sun climbed higher in the sky, bathing the village in golden light, the work took on a feverish pace. But as the day waned and the shadows lengthened, the energy shifted. The last cut of the machete rang out, a final chord in the symphony of the day. And as the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the forest floor, the true spirit of the harvest emerged. The clearing became a dance floor, and the cocoa pods, symbols of a day's work and a season's yield, were set aside as the villagers broke into joyous song and dance. Drums beat out rhythms as old as the hills, and the air vibrated with the pulse of the earth. Under the cloak of night, the dance reached a fever pitch, a celebration of survival, of unity, and of the bounty that the land had provided. Each twirl, each leap, each clap was a testament to the power of community and the resilience of the human spirit. The cocoa tree, silent witness to the ebb and flow of the day, stood firm, its branches reaching up as if in salute to the spirit of togetherness that pulsed around it. It was more than just a crop. It was a partner, a participant, and a symbol. And as the dance wound down and the fire crackled merrily, casting flickering shadows on the faces of the celebrants, it was clear that the true essence of the harvest lay not just in the beans gathered, but in the bonds that united the villagers under the cloak of night. Yet the relationship between the people and their cocoa was not always harmonious. There were times when the trees fell ill, when the beans failed to thrive, when the winds of change threatened to shake the very foundations of their traditions. In those moments, the cocoa tree took on a different character, not as a provider, but as a challenge, a test of faith, and a reminder of life's inherent uncertainty. Like, for instance, the dreaded capsize, a fungal disease that could ravage entire plantations, turning the lush green of healthy leaves to the sickly yellow of decay. When the capsized struck, fear rippled through the villages like the spread of the disease itself. Farmers, their faces etched with worry, would gather at the base of affected trees, not in celebration, but in somber prayer. They besieged the spirits, not for a cure, but for the strength to endure, to weather the storm that nature had unleashed. For many, it wasn't just the potential loss of income that troubled them, but the symbolic damage to their connection with the land. If the cocoa failed, how could they, as stewards of the earth, hope to appease the spirits and maintain the delicate balance of life? Through it all, the elders stood firm, their wisdom a beacon in the gathering gloom. They spoke of patience, of respect for the rhythms of nature, and most importantly, of perseverance. The cocoa, they said, was a test, a trial that would reveal not just the strength of their crops, but the strength of their character. As the Togolese sun rose and set over the horizon day after day, the villagers tended to their crops with a mix of hope and resignation. They knew that life was a balance of light and dark, of joy and sorrow, of plenty and want, and in tending to their cocoa, they were tending not just to a livelihood, but to the very essence of their existence. Each pod, each carefully plucked bean was a testament to their resilience, a silent prayer for sustenance, a tribute to the land that sustained them. And in the quiet moments, when the wind whispered through the leaves and the distant birdsong echoed in the stillness, they found solace in the simple truth that they were not alone. The spirits of their ancestors, the guardians of their land, and the very essence of their culture were with them, nurturing and guiding them through the trials of life, just as the cocoa tree had done for generations past. Colonialism pressed hard against the old ways. Officials urged monoculture, pushing farmers to abandon the mixed cropping systems that had shielded the soil for generations. They promoted chemicals and uniformity, insisting that tradition was backward. Yet, in the quiet corners of groves and in the memories of elders, fragments of indigenous practice survived. Fragile threads of resilience woven into daily toil. Some farmers continued to plant cocoa beneath the shade of tall plantain or palm trees, despite orders to clear them. They knew the soil needed cover, that moisture must be guarded from the relentless sun. Others secretly rotated their fields, blending cocoa with food crops so families would not starve if market prices collapsed. These choices were acts of quiet defiance, of remembering that survival was never only about cash, but about balance with the earth. Knowledge moved in whispers. Fathers taught sons how to watch for ants that warned of infestations. Mothers showed daughters the old ways of fermenting beans using woven mats and leaves instead of imported crates. Grandparents, sitting beneath the trees at dusk, would explain how to read the health of the land by the flight of birds or the scent of the wind. Each lesson was a safeguard against forgetting. There were also moments when tradition and colonial science clashed openly. Some officials scolded farmers for wasting space by planting diverse crops, but the elders held their ground. The soil is not a machine, they would reply. It is a living being. Even when mocked or fined, many clung to their methods, not from stubbornness, but from memory. A deep knowledge that these ways had sustained people long before cocoa ever arrived. Over time, this quiet resistance proved itself. In periods of drought, shaded farms survived better. In years of price collapse, families who had intercropped with yams or cassava could still eat. What outsiders dismissed as superstition turned out to be science of another kind, rooted not in laboratories, but in lived experience. And so, even under pressure, the old ways endured, bent but not broken, hidden but not erased. indigenous knowledge flowed like an underground stream, waiting for new generations to bring it back into the open. We are in Togo, in West Africa, where we will learn how centuries-old traditions related to cocoa and land use have helped rural communities adapt to and resist colonial and global pressures. In the 19th century, European colonizers introduced cocoa to Togo and demanded that farmers abandoned traditional polyculture for commercial monocultures of cocoa. Despite this, many farmers continued to grow a diversity of crops, which provided food security and ecosystem services. By understanding the historical context of these agricultural practices, we can better understand how and why the knowledge and innovations of indigenous farmers have shaped and continue to shape our relationship with food, land, and culture. We meet Togolese farmer Komi Agbekovi and his family as they work their cocoa farm, while sharing stories about how their community has maintained traditional knowledge and practices around cocoa cultivation despite colonial and global pressures to conform to Western agricultural norms. Our story takes us back to a time when the Togolese people had been cultivating cocoa for several generations. During the colonial period, the French colonial administration mandated the clearing of all vegetation around cocoa trees in order to maximize production. This policy aimed to increase yields by ensuring that cocoa trees received maximum sunlight, but it came at the expense of biodiversity and soil health. Despite this mandate, many farmers, like Com's grandparents, continued to grow a variety of crops alongside cocoa. This traditional practice, known as agroforestry, allowed farmers to diversify their income sources, provide habitat for beneficial insects, and maintain soil fertility. It was a sustainable way of farming that had been developed over centuries and was deeply ingrained in the local culture. As we hear more about Com's life story, we see how his personal journey reflects larger patterns of colonialism's impact on indigenous knowledge and practices. We learn about the challenges he faced and the resilience he demonstrated in preserving traditional ecological knowledge. In the face of external pressures to conform, colonial officials often viewed indigenous knowledge and practices as backward or superstitious, dismissing them as obstacles to progress and development. However, as we'll see, this perspective ignored the deep ecological wisdom embedded in traditional practices. The Togolese people's intimate knowledge of their local environment and its complexities allowed them to develop sustainable and resilient agricultural systems that have stood the test of time. Komi's story highlights how the commodification of cocoa during the colonial period led to a shift in farmers' priorities, from subsistence farming to cash cropping. This shift not only affected their relationship with the land, but also their connection to their cultural heritage. Many farmers felt pressured to abandon traditional practices that were seen as incompatible with modern agricultural techniques. However, despite these pressures, some farmers, like Com's family, held on to their cultural knowledge and practices, adapting them to the changing circumstances while preserving their essence. This resilience is a testament to the power of cultural knowledge and the importance of respecting and preserving indigenous practices. Komi Agbekovi, a farmer from a small village in Togo, has dedicated his life to preserving traditional cocoa farming practices. Growing up on his family's cocoa farm, Komi learned the intricacies of agroforestry from his grandparents and parents. He witnessed firsthand the benefits of this traditional system, including its ability to sustain the local ecosystem and provide food security for his community. Despite the challenges he faced, including navigating colonial policies that often disregarded indigenous knowledge and practices, Komi remained steadfast in his commitment to preserving traditional cocoa farming. His story reflects the larger struggle of indigenous communities worldwide to maintain their cultural heritage in the face of globalization and modernization. Through his dedication, Comey has not only ensured the continuation of his family's legacy, but also contributed to the broader effort to recognize and value indigenous knowledge and practices. His story serves as an inspiration to others, demonstrating the power of cultural resilience and the importance of honoring traditional ecological knowledge. One example of this is the practice of growing cocoa under the shade of taller perennial plants, such as banana or plantain trees. This technique helps to maintain a microclimate that protects cocoa from the harsh elements, while also providing habitat for beneficial insects and animals. Additionally, the practice of intercropping, which involves growing multiple crops together, helps to diversify income sources and ensure food security for farmers and their families. These traditional practices not only demonstrate a deep understanding of the local ecosystem, but also highlight the adaptability and resilience of indigenous communities in the face of environmental challenges. By preserving and promoting these practices, Togo stands to benefit from the valuable lessons embedded in its cultural heritage, while also contributing to global efforts to promote sustainable agriculture and cultural diversity. As we continue to learn from and support indigenous communities in their efforts to preserve their cultures and knowledge, we can all play a part in ensuring that traditional practices like cocoa farming continue to thrive for generations to come. As we wrap up our time in Togo, we reflect on the enduring legacy of indigenous knowledge and practices and the importance of preserving cultural diversity in our globalized world. Through the stories and experiences of farmers like Comey Agbokovi, we gain a deeper appreciation for the wisdom and resilience of indigenous communities. Their intimate connection to the land and their deep understanding of ecological systems offer valuable lessons for us all. By recognizing and valuing indigenous knowledge, we can work towards a more sustainable and equitable future. Embracing cultural diversity and learning from traditional practices such as cocoa farming not only enriches our understanding of the world, but also empowers us to address pressing global challenges. While the farmer bent low beneath the weight of his harvest, another figure stood tall in the bustling towns and ports of Togo. The cocoa trader, these men, and sometimes women, were the bridge between the soil and the world beyond. They did not carry machetes through groves or blister their hands on pods, but their influence shaped the rhythm of rural life as surely as rain or drought. Their stalls were fixed points in the landscape. Inn and markets swelled with energy during the harvest season. Sacks of cocoa beans were piled high, stitched shut with coarse thread, exhaling the bittersweet aroma of wealth in waiting. Traders bargained with practiced voices, their ledgers open, their pens scratching figures that could mean fortune or despair for farming families. The marketplace was a theater where power and poverty met face to face, and where the worth of months of labor was decided in a single exchange. We're going to imagine this now. A busy cocoa market during the 1970s. The air is thick with anticipation. Traders in their colorful patterned baobas are surrounded by towering sacks of cocoa. Women in head ties balanced precariously stacked baskets on their heads. All around us, there is a chaotic yet vibrant energy as farmers from surrounding villages converge on the market, seeking to exchange their hard-earned harvest for goods and services. The traders grew in stature. Some were former farmers who rose through shrewd calculation, their knowledge of the land and its bounty informing their trading acumen. Others were urban elites, backed by capital and connections, who recognized the lucrative potential of this newfound agricultural wealth. They became the visible faces of cocoa wealth, driving cars through dusty streets, building houses of cement, while others lived in mud-brick huts. Their names were whispered with both respect and envy, for they embodied a possibility that cocoa could elevate one beyond subsistence into prestige. But their rise was a source of tension. Farmers grumbled that traders profited while their backs ached. Some accused them of cheating scales, of lowering prices when rains had been poor, of colluding with foreign buyers to squeeze the village harvest. Yet, at the same time, many depended on these traders for credit, a loan of cash or seed that kept a household alive until the next season. It was a relationship of resentment and necessity, of distrust and dependency, woven tight by circumstance. Imagine again, but this time our scene shifts to a Togolese cocoa trader weighing beans on a large iron scale. Dust motes dance in the air, each speck a silent witness to the drama unfolding before us. Farmers, their faces etched with the toil of the land, stand by, watching anxiously as their livelihoods hang in the balance. The trader, a figure of quiet power in this setting, carefully notes the weight, his expression betraying none of the calculations swirling in his mind. The air is thick with tension as he announces the weight, the scene alive with the muted sunlight filtering through the trees and the sound of hushed voices. Over time, the most successful traders did more than accumulate money. They built networks of influence. Some became patrons in their towns, paying school fees for children, funding funerals, sponsoring church repairs, and earning loyalty through generosity. Cocoa wealth was not only an economic tool, but also a political one, capable of shaping allegiances and ambitions. Farmers, often burdened by debts and insistent traders, sought solace in numbers, in statistics that measured not just the weather or their yield, but also the very essence of their toil. As cocoa's importance grew, so did the need to quantify it, to capture its essence in figures. This was the birth of a new profession, the enumerator, whose job it was to translate nature's bounty into columns of numbers. Enumerators were vital to understanding cocoa's impact. They descended from the cacao family, were trained to read the language of the pods, but their skills went beyond the grove. They could add and subtract, multiply and divide, turning the harvest into numbers that informed decisions in boardrooms and government offices thousands of miles away. In Loam, a young man named Kofi adjusted his glasses and dipped his pen into ink. On his desk lay maps of the region, each marked with numbers that represented not just geographical coordinates, but the lifeblood of the nation. His work was crucial. Each number he recorded told a story, a tale of sun-drenched days and rain-filled nights, of blossoming flowers and ripening fruits. He was creating a portrait of Togo's cocoa, a masterpiece made of figures rather than paint. Enumerators were more than just number crunchers. They were the eyes and ears of the unseen forces that governed cocoa's fate. They saw firsthand the impact of sunshine and showers, of disease and decay. They listened to farmers' hopes and fears, their triumphs and tragedies. They were the link between the silent language of the soil and the clamoring demands of the market. In the evenings, after the day's figures were recorded and maps annotated, Kofi would sit on his veranda, sipping coffee and staring at the stars. He thought of the farmers, their faces etched with the hardships of the land, their hands calloused from years of toil. He wondered about their lives, their dreams, their struggles. He knew that their fates were intertwined with his, that the numbers he recorded could make or break families, could bring prosperity or push them further into hardship. Kofi understood that the cocoa industry, with its complex web of buyers, brokers, and exporters, was a world unto itself. He saw how decisions made in faraway capitals could affect the very survival of the farmers he had come to admire. he grappled with questions that echoed in the silence of the night. Who truly benefited from the golden bean? And could its shadow ever lift from the land and its people? Meanwhile, nestled in the bustling heart of Loam, a group of men gathered in the shade of a sprawling mango tree. They were a diverse lot, united by their common interest in the fortunes of cocoa. There was Amatip, a grizzled veteran of the trade, his face a roadmap of the many journeys he had taken. Beside him sat Zia, a newcomer, eager to prove himself in this world of wily traders. Between them was Kofi, the enumerator, his presence adding a crucial perspective to their discussions. Their talks were filled with the rustling of papers, the murmur of voices, and the clink of glasses as they shared stories, traded tips, and negotiated deals. They discussed the intricacies of the market, the fluctuating prices, the shifting alliances, and the constant challenges. They debated strategies, weighed risks, and sought to outmaneuver their competitors. For in this world of cocoa trading, as in any other realm of commerce, success was a delicate dance. It required an understanding of the product, a keen sense of timing, and the ability to adapt to unforeseen circumstances. It meant being one step ahead, reading the signs, predicting trends, and striking deals that brought the highest returns. The men talked late into the night, their voices growing softer as the moon climbed higher in the sky. They spoke not only of profits and prospects, but also of the impact of their trade on the lives of others. They grappled with the ethical dilemmas, the power dynamics, and the social responsibilities that came with their role as middlemen in this vast cocoa empire. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere shifted from lively banter to serious contemplation. They discussed the challenges faced by the farmers, the agents of change, the middlemen, and the enumerators. They acknowledged the importance of each role in the intricate dance of cocoa production and trade. The fire crackles softly, and we picture the contrast. Calloused hands in the groves and polished shoes in the markets, both tied together by the same humble bean. They pondered the imbalances, the disparities, and the injustices that permeated the system and sought ways to address them. They talked about fair prices, sustainable practices, and the empowerment of the communities from which cocoa sprang. They acknowledged the historical baggage, the colonial roots, and the lingering effects of exploitation. And they wondered how to break free from the cycles of poverty and dependence that had plagued generations. They knew that the answers were not simple, that the problems were deeply ingrained, and that the solutions would require collective effort and commitment. And yet, as the night deepened and the stars twinkled above them, they held on to hope. They dreamed of a future where cocoa brought prosperity, where farmers were valued, where middlemen operated ethically, and where enumerators' data led to positive change. They envisioned a world where the golden bean did not just sustain economies, but also lifted lives and empowered communities. As the first rays of dawn touched the horizon, they rose to end their meeting, each man carrying with him the weight of the night's discussions. They stepped out into the day, ready to face the challenges and seize the opportunities that lay ahead in the world of cocoa. As cocoa grew from a crop into an economic engine, it reshaped power in Togo and beyond. Those who controlled the farms, the trade routes, or the export licenses became a new elite. Not warriors or priests, but men and women whose wealth flowed from beans drying under the hot sun. Chiefs who once measured power by lineage now found themselves measured against farmers with connections to European merchants and access to cash. When the Portuguese arrived in Elmina in 1482, they encountered a society like many others along the coast. Small farming villages dotted the landscape, ruled over by semi-autonomous chiefs. Their power came from controlling trade along the coast, thanks to their monopoly on the most valuable commodity of the time, enslaved people. Their main rival was the neighboring Ashanti Kingdom, which sought to expand its own domain and influence. But all that would change with the introduction of cocoa. It started small. In the 17th century, seeds were brought from the Amazon and planted along the coast. Cocoa trees are a funny thing. They don't grow well everywhere. They need warm temperatures and lots of rainfall, but not too much. Too little or too much, and your harvest will fail. And the coast of West Africa is one of the very few places on Earth with just the right conditions for growing cocoa. At first, it wasn't clear why. The Dutch were the first Europeans to really take notice of cocoa. They started buying up the beans from local merchants who got them from farmers in their networks. The Dutch weren't interested in drinking the bitter beverage the beans produced. Instead, they saw an opportunity to make money off a popular drink back home. One that tasted a lot better with a bit of cocoa added to it. That drink was chocolate. The trees spread from the coast inland. Initially, this was largely due to enslaved people escaping from coastal forts and plantations and bringing with them seedlings that they had stolen. Where they settled, they grew cocoa, and where there were trees, there was profit to be made. The farms were small, maybe 100 trees or so, and were run by men and women who lived on the land. They would work the fields alongside other crops like coffee, palm oil, bananas or rice. Cocoa was just one part of their income, one of several ways they put food on the table. For these farmers, harvesting cocoa wasn't necessarily a big deal. The work was seasonal and fit nicely alongside other aspects of life on the farm. It was fun, actually. Picking the pods out of the tree was a game, kind of like hide and seek. But that all changed when the Europeans realized that this bean was a gold mine, literally. We're talking pounds of gold per acre. That's way more than anywhere else in the world. So they wanted more and more of it. When the Europeans offered the Togolese merchants a fair price for every bean, the farmers started paying attention. Soon, everyone was clearing more and more land and planting more and more cocoa. By the 19th century, it had become the most valuable crop in the region, worth twice as much as gold. And soon enough, there was enough cocoa in the region to supply the whole world. But that didn't mean that everyone profited. To get the best prices, the beans had to be carefully sorted, dried and packaged in a particular way, a process that required a merchant's expertise and capital. Since merchants were usually based in towns, farmers would bring their beans there to sell. In exchange, they received manufactured goods like textiles, metal tools, ornaments, guns and ammunition, and, above all, cash. And those who controlled the flow of this lucrative commodity became the biggest money makers in the region. They formed a new elite, one that included some chiefs, but also a lot of people who had nothing to do with the old system. Now, this isn't unique to the region. Whenever there's been a major shift in wealth, say from fishing to piracy or wheat to oil, there's usually been a new rich class that emerges. It's just unusual for that class to emerge so quickly. Usually, it takes centuries. But when it comes to cocoa, we're talking decades. And the Togolese weren't alone. All across West Africa, there was a similar transformation taking place. Big families with powerful chiefs at their head dominated the trade. These included the Abumi in the Ojar Kingdom, the Denkara and the Fant Confederacy in the Gold Coast, and the Wolof and Sira kingdoms of Senegal and the Sine Saloum Delta. These cocoa elites wielded influence not only over markets but also over politics. They could use their wealth to finance festivals, lend money in times of famine, or sway colonial administrators with gifts and promises. Of course, they weren't exactly generous. Much of what they gave was self-serving. but that's true of any powerful group. Still, in many cases, the cocoa elite didn't just accept the status quo, they challenged it. In fact, in many places, they were the driving force behind political change. In Abeokuta, for example, the old Oyo Empire was in decline. Internal conflict and external pressure from the rising Ashanti kingdom meant that authority was weak. In stepped the merchant class, funding a military apparatus that allowed them to conquer the old Oyo Empire core cities and establish their own state in Abeokuta. Similarly, along the Gold Coast, the emergence of powerful merchant families contributed to the collapse of the Akwamu Confederacy. The Akwamu were a powerful militaristic state, but they relied heavily on tribute from subject peoples. Once those peoples had other options, like selling their cocoa to the Fant Confederacy instead, the Akwamu lost power. In fact, these new merchant states would eventually be conquered by the British and Germans, who would rule them as colonies. And despite the political turmoil that they caused, these cocoa elites were largely tolerated by colonial rulers because they continued to generate huge profits. After all, the colonial enterprise depended on exporting cocoa to fuel the economies of Europe. For those who grew and traded cocoa, though life wasn't necessarily sweet, power built on cocoa was fragile. Prices were set thousands of miles away in Europe, and changes in fashion or the economy there could raise or crush fortunes overnight. A poor harvest could strip a family of its influence, while a well-timed shipment could crown another. A single good year might turn a farmer into a wealthy landowner, complete with multiple wives, servants, and a large house. But that success could easily be undone if prices fell the next year or disease destroyed the harvest. At the same time, the cocoa elite were vulnerable to the vagaries of colonial rule. After all, they had come to prominence thanks to the colonial economy, and so they were dependent on the goodwill of colonial officials for things like export licenses, control of trade routes, and access to credit. The situation was especially dire for the farmers. They were entirely dependent on the whims of the colonial economy. Unlike the cocoa elites, they couldn't afford to wait out a bad year. They needed cash flow to survive. And since they didn't have much leverage over colonial officials, they suffered the worst when things went bad. That said, it wasn't all doom and gloom. Even though farmers and traders alike were vulnerable, they also stood to gain the most. Cocoa was an engine of constant churn, a cycle of boom and bust that created opportunities for those who could navigate its ups and downs. And those who did would find themselves with an extraordinary amount of wealth and power in a region that had previously known neither. Beyond the groves and markets, the influence of cocoa extended into halls of local power. Traders did not merely buy and sell beans. They shaped decisions that rippled through villages and towns. Chiefs, local officials, and even colonial administrators consulted them, aware that control over cocoa meant control over wealth, livelihoods, and influence. These gatherings, sometimes formal councils, sometimes informal meetings in shaded courtyards, became arenas where the fate of harvests and households was quietly decided. In this space, disputes over prices, land or transportation routes were settled. A miscalculated shipment could be forgiven with the right counsel. An ambitious farmer could rise or fall, depending on which trader supported him. Cocoa was more than beans. It was currency of respect, a symbol of power that moved invisibly behind the visible bustle of village life. Let's pause here for a moment. We are now deep within the narrative, having started our journey at the farm level. We've followed the beans to the markets, observed daily life, and are now immersed in councils of power. This is a key transition point in the story. It is important that you feel this shift in setting and stakes as much as you can. So let us take a moment. Imagine yourself in a Togoese town, sitting beneath the shade of a large tree or perched on the edge of a veranda. Around you, traders dressed in fine clothes sit on low stools or lean against tree trunks. Village elders and officials are there too, their faces etched with wisdom and concern. Papers and ledgers are spread across a low wooden table, the sunlight filtering through leaves overhead, dappling the scene in shades of green and gold. The air is heavy with the scent of wood, dust, and the sweet aroma of cocoa. Now picture the scene. Listen to the murmur of voices discussing the future of the harvest, the price of exports, the challenges of transportation. Feel the weight of each word spoken. Each decision made here matters. These men hold the economic lifeline of their communities in their hands. Now, as we move forward, continue to feel this atmosphere, the quiet intensity of responsibility. Let us delve deeper into the heart of this story. In these councils, the language is often quiet but intense, seasoned with the weight of tradition and the demands of the modern world. The traders, once farmers themselves, speak with the confidence of numbers and markets. They hold the scales of supply and demand in their minds, knowing how much the world needs their beans and how much their people need to sell. The elders, rooted in the customs of their lands, bring the perspective of generations, reminding all that progress must not come at the cost of tradition or the earth's bounty. The officials, caught between colonial rules and local realities, seek solutions that bring order to the chaos of fluctuating prices and unpredictable seasons. And so the discussions go on, weaving together the threads of tradition, economics, and governance into the fabric of a community's fate. It is a delicate dance, a balancing act that has been going on for years, shaping the very essence of life in these parts. The cocoa elite used their authority to secure loyalty. Loans were offered, debts forgiven selectively, and favors exchanged for allegiance. Schools, community projects, or small infrastructure improvements often bore the fingerprints of these traders, blending economic influence with social power. They became pillars of towns, figures whose reach extended from the grove to the governor's office. Now, let's shift our focus slightly. Imagine a bustling marketplace. On one side, sacks of cocoa beans are piled high, their rich aroma filling the air. On the other side, traders are engrossed in lively negotiations, their voices echoing through the stalls. But beyond the din of the market, in quieter corners of town, a different kind of transaction is taking place. Here, deals are struck that will impact not just the buying and selling of beans, but the very fabric of the community. In the shaded courtyards of grand houses, or around tables laden with papers and ledgers, the cocoa elite are at work. These are the men who have risen from the ranks of farmers and traders, now wielding considerable influence in their towns. Their power, however, is not just about money or land. It is deeply entwined with the social and political fabric of their communities. They are not just economic players, they are now community leaders. As the sun beats down on the marketplace, these men make decisions that will affect the lives of many. They offer loans to struggling farmers, ensuring that they can hold on to their farms. They forgive debts strategically, gaining unwavering loyalty in return. They fund schools and community projects, their names becoming synonymous with progress and prosperity. Every favor granted, every loan extended is a calculated move in the game of influence. They are careful to build alliances, reaching out to chiefs, local officials, and even colonial administrators. They understand the value of networks, using them to protect their interests and advance their influence. In the intricate dance of power, they move with precision, each step aimed at consolidating their position. Their wealth, once measured in sacks of cocoa beans, is now represented by buildings and ledgers. Their power, once confined to the market, now echoes in the halls of local governance. And yet, as the day fades and the marketplace empties, these men know that their power comes with risks. If global cocoa prices fall, debts may not be repaid. If harvests fail, the same communities they help may suffer. If misunderstandings arise, the alliances they've carefully built could crumble. For in this intricate game of influence, every move has a countermove. Every advantage can turn into a liability. Thus, as the night falls over the town and the fireflies begin their silent dance, these men sit in their homes, not just as wealthy traders, but as custodians of their community's fate. They are the ones who hold the balance, not just of the beans and the money, but of hopes and dreams of many. The quiet responsibility weighs heavily on them, a reminder that with great power comes great peril. And so the story continues, weaving together the threads of wealth, influence, and peril in the twilight of a changing era. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape, the traders find themselves at a crossroads. Their wealth, once a source of pride and power, now feels like a burden. They've climbed the ladder of success, but the view from the top is fraught with uncertainty. Their sprawling businesses, once symbols of triumph, now threaten to consume them. The very networks that gave them power are now potential pitfalls. The debts they've collected, the alliances they've forged, and the expectations they've set are all coming due. They realize that the world they've climbed to is unstable, unpredictable, and unforgiving. For decades, they've navigated the markets with acumen, riding the waves of supply and demand. They've dealt with the whims of colonial officials, understanding the language of power. They've bargained with farmers, sharing in their joys and sorrows. But now the rules seem to be changing. The ground beneath their feet is shifting, and they must adapt or be swept away. Yet, despite the tremors of uncertainty, there is a glint of resolve in their eyes. They are the cocoa elite, after all. They've weathered storms before. They've turned small plots of land into thriving farms. They've transformed humble villages into bustling markets. They've bridged the worlds of tradition and modernity, of Africa and Europe. And now they must do it again. They must navigate the treacherous waters of a changing world, balancing the weight of their past triumphs with the demands of the present. They must use all their skills, knowledge, and networks to steer their communities through the uncharted waters ahead. For the story of cocoa is far from over. The beans still grow on the vines, the markets still beckon, and the world still craves its rich aroma and bitter delight. And at the heart of it all are the Togolese traders, the true connoisseurs of cocoa, ready to face the dawn of a new era. We end our journey at the crossroads of wealth and peril, where the Togolese cocoa traders stand as figures of resilience and adaptation. Their story, deeply intertwined with the fate of cocoa, reflects the complex dynamics of an evolving world. Their journey from humble beginnings to positions of power and influence is a testament to human ambition and resourcefulness. As we reflect on their journey, we realize that their rise to prominence was not merely about economic success, but a nuanced dance between tradition and modernity, between the African and European worlds. They are the embodiment of this fusion, fluent in multiple languages, understanding multiple cultures, and bridging multiple economies. However, their tale also underscores the inherent risks of wealth and power. Their great fortunes, once symbols of triumph, become liabilities in a shifting world. Their extensive networks, once sources of strength, morph into potential pitfalls. They are reminded that in the intricate game of global trade, no position is truly secure, no advantage absolute. Yet, their story does not end here, for they are the cocoa elite, a title they have earned through years of hard work, smart decisions, and sheer determination. They are the connoisseurs of cocoa, and their love for the bean runs deep. Just as cocoa has evolved from a luxury good to a global commodity, they too have evolved from simple farmers to savvy businessmen. And as long as the world loves its hot chocolate, its pastries, and its ice creams, as long as the world craves cocoa, they will adapt, innovate, and thrive. Their story is a reflection of ours, a reminder that, in an ever-changing world, adaptability and resilience are the ultimate currencies of success. As the sun sets over Togo's cocoa groves, the day's labor begins to fade into memory. The farmer wipes his brow, the children rest beneath the shade, and the traders close their ledgers, their influence stretching quietly into the night. Cocoa has been more than a crop. It has been a teacher, a burden, a source of wealth, and a mirror reflecting the struggles and resilience of all who touch it. Through centuries, from the sweat of smallholders to the ledgers of traders, cocoa has demanded patience, endurance, and respect. It taught communities about balance, about understanding the soil and the sun, and about surviving in a world shaped by forces far beyond their control. Even as colonial powers came and went, and markets shifted with distant winds, the lessons of the land endured, embedded in the hands, hearts, and memory of the people. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars, letting the quiet weight of the day sink gently into our bones. In this place, where shadows lengthen and the day's work is done, we find ourselves at the heart of Togo, where the story of cocoa and the nation intertwine in a rich tapestry of toil, tradition, and transformation. We've walked among the rustling pods, felt the earth's weight under our feet, and seen the sun's relentless dance in the sky. We've heard tales of how cocoa broke bodies, strained families, and tested spirits, yet also built resilience, wisdom, and community. Traders, elders, and farmers alike became part of a tapestry, one where labor, knowledge, and influence were inseparably linked. In every pod harvested, every market weighed, and every council meeting held under the heat of day, the story of Togo's people was written. Often silently, often under great strain, but always with enduring human dignity. And now, as night gently envelops us, we can see more clearly. The lines etched on the faces around the fire are not just marks of time, but stories of resilience of hands that have cradled life and livelihood of eyes that have watched seasons turn and change, and of hearts that have held both sorrow and hope. Under the cloak of 1,000 stars, the air alive with the scent of wood smoke and distant earth, we listen to the elders. Their voices, like the crackling fire, carry tales across generations. They speak of a land that gave and took away, that demanded respect and offered some measure of grace. They tell of how cocoa, like a patient lover, revealed its secrets to those who toiled, who understood its language and honored its cycles. The older I get, the more I understand that cocoa was never just beans. It was a test, a teacher, a thread connecting generations. It held the power to both challenge and sustain, to humble and to elevate. And in that duality lies the heartbeat of Togo, the labor, the wisdom, and the quiet endurance of its people. The moon climbs higher, bathing the landscape in silver light, and we are humbled by the strength that has brought the people of Togo through centuries of change. From the weathered hands of the farmers to the time-honored rituals, every aspect of cocoa production is a testament to the human spirit. Now, as the night deepens and the fireflies begin their silent symphony, we feel the cool embrace of the Togolese night. Around us, the sounds of the village settle into a peaceful rhythm, the lullaby of a resilient community. Here, beneath the watchful eyes of the stars, we find solace in the quiet strength of the people, in the timeless wisdom of the elders, and in the enduring legacy of cocoa. For in the very essence of this ancient crop lies the spirit of Togo, a spirit that has danced with the shadows and sung with the stars, a spirit that has endured and evolved, leaving its indelible mark on the hands, hearts, and history of an entire nation. You are now under baobab skies,